They say Florida is all sunshine, beaches, and laughter. But behind the palm trees and blue skies, there's a place where the sun never truly set. A place that swallowed light and gave birth to shadows. This was no ordinary hospital. It was a warehouse of suffering, a graveyard for the living. Patients went in, but some say their souls never came out. They called it Sunland Hospital. But today the name drips with dread. Visitors who dare to walk its abandoned halls claim the walls whisper with cries of children. Nurses who never left still roam in silence, and wheelchairs roll on their own through corridors choked with dust. And tonight, we're stepping inside together. But before we dive in, I want to know something from you. Tell me in the comments right now. Where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it? Are you safe in the daylight, or are you brave enough to be watching this in the dead of night? And one more question. When was the last time you visited a hospital? Did it feel like a place of healing, or did you feel that cold, unsettling presence? That maybe you weren't as alone as you thought? I read your answers, and I love connecting with this haunted community, so make sure you comment. Then you are exactly the kind of person I make these videos for. So hit subscribe right now, join our haunted family, and let's step inside Sunland Hospital together. The Sunland Hospitals were once a network across Florida, but none earned the kind of infamy that the Tallahassee location did. It began in the 1950s, during the terrifying days of the polio epidemic. Families were gripped with fear, children struck down, their muscles weakened, many unable to breathe on their own. To meet the crisis, Florida built a sprawling new hospital, bright and modern for its time. It was supposed to be a beacon of hope. But hope has a way of rotting, especially in places where light doesn't reach. With the arrival of the polio vaccine, cases dwindled. The once busy wards grew quieter, emptier. And in that emptiness, the hospital was given a new role: long-term care for the mentally and physically disabled. On paper, it sounded compassionate. In reality, it became something closer to a prison. Patients arrived by the dozens, then by the hundreds. Children with severe disabilities. Adult society wanted to forget. Some were dropped off by families who never returned. Others were sent by the state, warehoused like inventory. As the years passed, the bright hospital grew darker. Funding dried up, staff were overwhelmed, rooms became overcrowded, beds rusted. The smell of antiseptic was replaced by something sour: sweat, mildew, decay. Newspapers would later expose the horror. Inspectors described children strapped into wheelchairs, their bodies frail as skeletons, their eyes vacant. Reports of starvation, mistreatment, and neglect filled the pages. Patients were left in soiled sheets. Some were locked away in barren rooms for days. It was no longer a hospital. It was a factory of despair. And even in life, some said it was haunted. One former nurse, interviewed years later, swore that even while she worked there, she would hear things she couldn't explain. Late at night, while making her rounds, she would hear the faint sound of children laughing, except the laughter wasn't joyful. It was broken, sharp, echoing in the halls long after the children had fallen silent in their beds. One night, she pushed open a door to check on a patient. The bed was empty, neatly made, but the sound of giggling was still there. She turned slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand, and in the corner of the room, she swore she saw the faint outline of a child, thin and pale, watching her. When she blinked, it was gone. She quit the hospital a week later, but she said the dreams never stopped. What do you think? Were these the cries of neglected children? Or something darker feeding on their suffering? Tell me below. I want to know what you believe. And that's just the beginning. Because Sunland didn't just collapse under neglect. It became a magnet for tragedy. For stories so disturbing, they've kept Tallahassee locals whispering for decades. What happened inside these walls left a scar on Florida's history, and some say the spirits of Sunland are still waiting for us. The stories of neglect at Sunland weren't just rumors whispered in the dark. They were documented, investigated, and splashed across headlines. By the late 1960s, the truth could no longer be hidden. Sunland was a place of horror, a house of pain disguised as a hospital. and the people of Florida began asking questions no one wanted to answer. Report after report described the same nightmare. Children tied into wheelchairs, unable to move for hours, even days. Patients with twisted limbs left lying in cribs without stimulation. Food trays slid into rooms and pulled out untouched because many couldn't even feed themselves. Overcrowding grew so bad that patients slept head to toe in the same bed. The staff were underpaid, overworked, and many simply stopped caring. There were whispers of outright cruelty. Patients beaten for crying, sedated for misbehaving, punished for no reason at all. And outside, the community knew. Parents would protest, organizations would call for reform, but still the hospital kept operating. Imagine being locked away in a place like that, with no way out, no one to protect you. Now ask yourself, what kind of energy do you think lingers in a place soaked in decades of suffering? If you had to spend just one night in an abandoned hospital like this, would you dare do it? Or would you run before the sun even set? Tell me below. I'm reading every single answer. Local legend tells of a boy named Daniel, no more than 8 years old. He had severe disabilities, and his parents, unable to care for him, left him at Sunland. He was small, frail, his bones sharp beneath his skin. Staff say Daniel never spoke, not a single word, but every night he would cry. Soft at first, then building into heartbreaking sobs that echoed down the corridors. One orderly admitted he grew so numb to it that he'd just shut the boy his door and walk away. But one night, the crying stopped. Silence filled the ward. Daniel was gone. His body was never found. Some say he wandered into the basement where laundry machines clanked and pipes rattled like bones. Others say he died in his bed and the staff quietly covered it up. But here's the chilling part. Even after the hospital closed, people who broke inside would claim they heard it. The faint, choking sobs of a boy in the dark. Some even swore they saw a thin child crouched in the corner, his eyes wide and unblinking. Ask anyone in Tallahassee. They'll tell you the boy never left. And Daniel isn't alone. Paranormal investigators who've stepped inside Sunland's ruins report shadows darting across hallways, doors slamming shut with no wind, and sudden drops in temperature that leave your breath hanging in the air. One group even captured an EVP recording where a child's voice whispered just one word: help. And now, whether you believe in spirits or not, one thing is certain: trauma leaves scars, and Sunland's walls are covered in them. I want to pause for a moment and ask you, have you ever been inside a hospital or abandoned building that gave you chills? Did you feel something was watching you? Share your story in the comments. I love reading your experiences, and I promise you're not alone. And if you're still here with me, still watching this story unfold, then I know you're one of us, part of this haunted community. So subscribe now if you haven't already, because we're only going deeper into the darkness from here. By the 1970s, Sunland had become infamous. State inspectors documented patients wasting away. Headlines screamed of abuse, starvation, and suffering. Yet somehow, the hospital limped on, year after year. It wasn't until 1983 that Sunland finally closed its doors for good. But shutting down a building doesn't erase its past. The patients may have been relocated, the halls emptied, the windows boarded. But ask anyone who's been near the ruins. They'll tell you the building was never truly silent. Teenagers would sneak in on dares. Paranormal groups would set up cameras. And almost every single one came back with a story. Some heard voices whispering their names. Some felt cold fingers brush against their skin. And some swore they saw figures moving just out of reach of their flashlights. The living had left Sunland, but the dead had not. There's a tale told by a local man who broke into the ruins with friends back in the early 1990s. They were teenagers, chasing a thrill. Armed with nothing but flashlights and bravado, they crept through the wreckage. One boy swore he saw a nurse standing at the end of the hallway. She wore a white dress, her cap tilted neatly on her head. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there staring. When they shouted, her face twisted into something monstrous, her mouth stretching too wide, eyes hollow. The group screamed and ran, stumbling over debris, not stopping until they were back outside under the Florida moonlight. To this day, that man says he never set foot near Sunland again. And yet that's just scratching the surface. Because Sunland wasn't only haunted by patients and nurses, it was haunted by something far darker. whispers of experiments, a basement filled with horrors that were never written in any report. And in the next part of our journey, we're going down there. Every haunted place has its core of darkness. At Sunland, that place was the basement. Locals whispered about it for decades. Patients and staff avoided it whenever possible. Even now, if you talk to anyone who worked there, their voices drop when you bring up the basement, as if saying too much might awaken something best left forgotten. The official story? The basement was just for storage. Old medical equipment, patient records, laundry machines. But the stories told by those who dared to enter paint a different picture. They talk about locked rooms, strange stains on the walls, and the sound of chains dragging across the floor long after the hospital had closed. One former nurse, who only ever agreed to speak under anonymity, claimed that in the 1960s, children who were too disruptive were sometimes taken downstairs. They would return hours later, silent, hollow-eyed, as if some part of them had been broken. What happened down there? No one could ever prove it. But the fear in her voice when she spoke was real. Imagine being one of those children. Imagine the sound of your footsteps echoing as you're led deeper into the underground. The flicker of failing fluorescent lights above you. The smell of mildew and bleach thick in the air. And then the heavy door slamming shut behind you. Do you think you'd have the courage to step inside that basement? Be honest. Tell me in the comments if you'd go down there, even for a second. There's a popular ghost story that has become almost inseparable from Sunland itself. The tale of the Iron Room. Supposedly hidden at the far end of the basement was a locked chamber with no windows and walls covered in steel plates. The story goes that patients placed inside would scream for hours, their voices carrying up through the vents into the wards above. Staff would pretend not to hear. By morning, the screams would stop. No records of this room exist, of course, but many who broke into Sunland claim they found a sealed-off door in the basement, welded shut with iron bars. What was inside, no one knows. Paranormal investigators who entered the basement after the hospital ES closure often reported the same thing. Equipment flickering off without explanation, static filling their cameras, and the overwhelming sensation that something was watching them from the shadows. One group even claimed that the batteries in every single flashlight they carried drained within minutes of stepping inside. But here is the part that really makes your blood run cold. Recordings captured in the basement frequently picked up voices. Not clear, friendly voices, but guttural whispers, sobs, and in one case, what sounded like a child crying for their mother. When played back later, the cries were faint but undeniable. Have you ever listened to an EVP recording before? Do you believe spirits can speak through static, or do you think it's just imagination? I'd love to know what you think. Drop your answer below. One fictionalized story passed around campfires tells of a boy named Jacob, admitted in the early 1970s. Jacob was only 6 years old, but he had a wild temper. His fits were uncontrollable, his energy too much for the overwhelmed staff. One day, after he bit an orderly in a frenzy, Jacob was dragged downstairs. Witnesses say they heard him screaming for hours. And then, nothing. Days later, another patient whispered that Jacob had never come back. But at night, the children in the ward swore they could hear him calling for help, his voice drifting through the vents from below. "Please, let me out." Even after the hospital closed, explorers who entered the basement claimed to hear it too. Some said they saw a small figure darting just out of sight, his footsteps pattering across the concrete. Now, whether Jacob was real or not, the story captures what Sunland represented to many, a place where children were silenced, their pain buried deep underground. And that's why, even today, the basement of Sunland is considered one of the most haunted spots in Florida. Think about it. How much suffering has to happen in one place for it to leave an imprint that lasts forever? If emotions are energy, Sunland's basement is overflowing with it. Even the demolition crews who came in the early 1990s had stories to tell. Some workers flat out refused to go down into the basement, insisting they heard footsteps following them or voices muttering just beyond the beam of their flashlights. One man said he saw a shadow run across the hall, but when he chased it, he found nothing but dust and rubble. And here's something that might surprise you. When Sunland was finally torn down in 1993, many believed the hauntings would end. After all, if the building was gone, how could the spirits remain? But as we'll soon explore, some places are too cursed to ever truly die. Because even today, the grounds where Sunland once stood are said to be alive with restless energy. But before we go there, let me ask you, if you could spend one night locked inside the Sunland basement, no phone, no flashlight, just you and the dark, would you survive it? Would you last till sunrise? Or would you be the one running for the door, begging to be let out? When Sunland finally shut its doors in 1983, the city of Tallahassee breathed a sigh of relief. The scandals had been too loud, the headlines too damning. For families who had been forced to place their loved ones there, the closure felt like justice, at least on the surface. But what no one expected was that Sunland's story was only just beginning. The hospital stood abandoned for a full decade, its windows boarded, its paint peeling, its walls cracked open to the Florida humidity. But silence does strange things to a place with such a violent past. The emptiness didn't cleanse Sunland, it magnified it. Soon, people began sneaking in. Teenagers dared each other to spend a night inside. College students with flashlights and shaky cameras documented their explorations. Paranormal investigators set up elaborate traps, waiting to capture proof of the other side. And time after time, they left with stories that sounded impossible. One group of friends who broke in during the late 1980s described finding children's drawings still tacked to the walls, crayons scattered across the floor as if dropped in mid-play. But when they turned to leave, they noticed something terrifying. The drawings weren't the same. Where at first they showed smiling stick figures and sunlit houses, now they were smeared with crude red crayon. The stick figures twisted, their faces screaming. No one admitted to changing them, but every person swore the drawings were different when they left. Can you imagine being there in that moment? Seeing something you know couldn't be real, yet happening right in front of your eyes? Tell me honestly, would you run or would curiosity force you to stay? And the stories kept piling up. One of the most famous involved a group of paranormal investigators who set up a tape recorder in the basement. They left it running for hours while they explored the upper floors. When they came back, the tape was full, but not of silence. Instead, they heard something bone-chilling, the rhythmic creak of a wheelchair moving back and forth across the concrete floor. Then, faintly, the sound of a child humming. No one was in the basement. No wheelchairs had been left behind. Yet the audio was undeniable. If you've ever heard an unexplained recording like that, you know how hard it is to shake. It sticks to you, echoes in your head. And if you haven't, tell me, do you think spirits can actually leave their voices behind? Or is it all in our minds? Another explorer told of a night when he and two friends ventured into the hospital with candles. Their flashlights had died, batteries drained in minutes, so they lit wax sticks to keep moving. As they reached the old children's ward, the air grew icy. Then came a sound they'll never forget, the sharp, echoing laughter of a child. It wasn't playful. It was mocking, cruel, bouncing from wall to wall until the candle flames sputtered and died. They fled into the night, swearing never to return. Fiction or not, these stories fueled Sunland's reputation as one of the most haunted locations in Florida. But the most disturbing accounts came after demolition. Because when the hospital was torn down in 1993, many assumed the hauntings would stop. No walls, no basement, no wards left standing, just grass and sky. But the spirits of Sunland didn't leave. Even today, people say the land itself is cursed. Walk across it at night, and you might hear footsteps crunching just behind you. Stand still and you'll feel a hand brush against your shoulder, though no one is there. Children playing nearby have reported hearing voices calling their names, even when their parents are far away. And one construction worker swore he saw a nurse in a white uniform standing in the middle of the field, staring at him. When he blinked, she was gone. Think about that for a moment. The building is gone, the concrete ripped apart, the walls reduced to dust. Yet the energy remains. It's as if Sunland's tragedies were carved into the earth itself, forever staining the soil. And here's where it gets even stranger. Some locals claim that if you dig too deep on the land where Sunland once stood, You'll find things buried there that were never meant to be uncovered. Bones, restraints, and broken equipment. One rumor insists that mass graves exist, hidden away from the public, filled with patients who died under mysterious circumstances. Officially, no such graves have been confirmed. But unofficially, the whispers never stopped. Now let me ask you, if you lived near this land, would you dare build a home on it? Would you let your children play there, knowing the suffering that once echoed across it? Drop your thoughts below. I'm fascinated to know how you would feel about living on haunted ground. But perhaps the most haunting detail of all is this: the spirits don't just linger on the land. People say they follow you home. Visitors who've walked the grounds claim that afterward, they've heard footsteps in their houses at night. They've seen shadows dart across their bedrooms. They've even felt small hands tugging at their blankets while they sleep. Sunland's ghosts, it seems, aren't bound by walls, and that raises an unsettling question. If you're watching this right now, hearing these stories, thinking about these spirits, are they listening to you too? Could simply speaking about Sunland invite something into your own life? That's for you to decide. Before we continue, I want you to do something for me. Look around the room you're in right now. Is it quiet? Is it dark? Do you feel completely alone? Or deep down, do you sense that maybe, just maybe, you aren't? Imagine this. You've heard the stories. You've watched the shaky camcorder footage, read the rumors online, laughed at your friends' ghost tales. But something in you wants more. You don't just want to hear the legends, you want to feel them. So one night, you grab a flashlight, hop a fence, and step onto the darkened soil of what was once Sunland Hospital. That's exactly what a man named Daniel claimed he did in the early 2000s. He said he went in looking for nothing more than a thrill. What he found was something he would never escape. Daniel described standing in the middle of the old field where the hospital once rose. The moon was full. The grass whispered with the wind. At first it felt calm, almost peaceful. But then came the smell. A sharp metallic scent that reminded him of blood. It hung heavy in the air, sour and suffocating. And with it came the sound of wheels squeaking across the ground. He turned, expecting to see another explorer. But instead, he swore he saw a figure, a nurse pushing an empty wheelchair across the grass. No face, no features, just a pale shape moving slowly in the moonlight. The moment Daniel stepped forward, the figure stopped, and the wheelchair spun on its own, turning toward him. He ran, swearing he could still hear the wheels following him long after he left the grounds. Now, whether Daniel's story was real or not, the detail that sticks with me is that smell. Have you ever noticed that with haunted places, scent is one of the most powerful triggers? Sulfur, rot, or blood. It's as if the air itself remembers. So let me ask you, what would shake you more in that situation? Seeing the figure, or smelling the blood before anything even appeared? Another tale comes from a woman named Marissa, who visited the site with her cousin. She claimed they set up a Ouija board in the center of the field, thinking it would be harmless fun. They asked the usual questions. Is anyone here with us? What is your name? For several minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly the planchette began to move. It spelled out one chilling word: hungry. The cousins laughed nervously, thinking one of them was pushing it. But when they tried to pack up and leave, Marissa said she felt a burning pain on her arm. When she rolled up her sleeve, there were scratches. 3 long, deep red marks that hadn't been there before. They never finished the session. They dropped the board and ran. And here's the most terrifying part. Weeks later, Marissa claimed the word hungry appeared scratched into the condensation on her bathroom mirror. She was alone. The door was locked. No one else was in the house. This is where Sunland's hauntings shift from creepy to personal. These stories aren't about wandering into an abandoned hospital anymore. They're about something following you, something attaching itself. Imagine watching this right now, and later tonight, as you brush your teeth, seeing a word appear in the fog of your own mirror. Could you laugh it off? Or would it make you think twice about what you were letting into your life by even listening to these stories? Then there was the crying girl, a legend that every local seems to know. They say if you walk the land just after midnight, you might hear her sobbing. A child's soft, heartbroken cry drifting through the night air. One man who claimed to hear it said he felt his chest tighten, like grief was wrapping itself around his ribs. When he called out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" the crying stopped. For a moment there was silence, and then, right in his ear, a whisper answered back, "Stay." He swears no one was there. But he left, heart pounding, and hasn't set foot near the property since. And maybe that's the true horror of Sunland, not the building, not even the stories, but the emotions tied to it. Because the children who lived there didn't just suffer physically, they suffered emotionally. Alone, neglected, often forgotten. That pain doesn't just disappear. Some believe it seeps into the earth, into the very air, and if you're sensitive enough, you can feel it as soon as you step foot there. I want to pause here and ask you, have you ever been in a place where the energy felt wrong? Not just creepy because it was dark, but heavy, suffocating, as though sadness itself was alive. If you have, drop your story in the comments. I'd love to know if you think places can truly hold on to emotions like that. But let us go even deeper, because there are those who believe Sunland doesn't just hold spirits of patience, but something darker, a force that feeds on the suffering that happened there. Paranormal teams have described their batteries dying within minutes, cameras shutting off, even team members collapsing without explanation. One investigator said she felt as though something wrapped invisible arms around her throat, squeezing until she blacked out. When she came to, she had bruises in the shape of fingers across her neck. Was it a spirit of a nurse, an orderly, or something else? Something born from the pain, a shadow creature that thrives on fear. Think about this. What if every haunted hospital, every asylum, every place of tragedy isn't just haunted? What if it's feeding something intelligent, something hungry? And here's where I want you to really lean in. If you've been watching from the start, you're already invested. You've heard the laughter, the crying, the whispers. But the real question is, are you safe right now? Because many believe that just by listening to these stories, you open a door. You invite the energy in. So if you've made it this far, you're part of this story now. Tell me, do you feel different? Does the air around you seem heavier? Do you want me to keep going deeper, peeling back more layers of Sunland's dark heart? If so, hit subscribe right now, because the next part of this journey may be the most disturbing yet. Some say the scariest thing about Sunland isn't in the shadows or the whispers. It is the way the spirits try to lure you in. They don't always scream or slam doors. Sometimes they sound like the very thing you most want to hear. One urban explorer, who called himself Nick, in an old forum post, described sneaking onto the grounds at night with two friends. He claimed they all heard the same thing. A child's voice calling softly, "Help me." At first, they thought it was a prank, maybe someone hiding in the bushes. But the voice came again, closer this time. "Please, help me." Nick swore it sounded like a little girl, no older than 8. Against his better judgment, he followed the voice toward the old rubble piles. His flashlight beam danced over weeds and broken concrete, and then he saw her. A small figure crouched by the wall, hair hanging over her face, shoulders shaking as if she were crying. He said his stomach dropped. Something inside told him not to move, not to go closer. But before he could call out, the girl slowly lifted her head. Where her eyes should have been were 2 gaping black holes. She opened her mouth, and instead of a sob, what came out was a scream, low, guttural, not a child's at all. Nick ran. He swears the scream followed him all the way to the street. What's terrifying here isn't just the ghost. It's the manipulation, the lure. Imagine being in that moment. Would you have gone closer? Or would your gut have told you to run? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how you would handle that choice. But not every haunting is about what you see or hear. Sometimes it's what you take with you. After Sunland closed, much of the rubble was hauled away, but not all of it. Some people kept souvenirs, bricks, old medical tools, even scraps of paperwork that somehow survived the decades. And here's where the stories take an even darker turn. Collectors claim those objects are cursed. One man who kept a single brick from the demolition said his house soon became unlivable. He heard scratching in the walls at night, saw shadows darting across his living room, and found his pets staring into corners, growling at nothing. Within months, he abandoned the home entirely. He left the brick behind. Another story tells of a group of teenagers who found an old wheelchair in a storage shed on the property. They thought it would be funny to wheel it out and use it as a prop for photos. But when they rolled it, they said it squeaked and rattled as if someone were still sitting in it. That night, one of them woke up to find the wheelchair at the foot of his bed. He lived miles away from Sunland. To this day, he refuses to talk about what happened after. Have you ever taken something from a haunted place? A stone, a trinket, maybe even just a photo, and then later felt like you brought something home with you? If so, you know exactly how terrifying this part of Sunland's story is. Then there are the shadow people. Multiple visitors over the years reported seeing tall, faceless figures drifting along the tree line or standing in the middle of the field where the hospital once stood. Some described them as 7 feet tall, thin, and impossibly dark, darker than the night itself. These figures don't move like humans. They flicker, glitching almost, appearing closer each time you blink. One eyewitness claimed she saw 3 of them standing in a row side by side at the edge of the property. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there. When she tried to film them, her camera refused to turn on. Moments later, they were gone. She left immediately and never returned. Here's the thing. Shadow people are reported all over the world, but at Sunland, they're different. They were tied to the energy of the patients who died there. Many believe these shadows aren't ghosts at all, but manifestations of suffering itself. Not human spirits, but something born of pain. If that's true, then Sunland didn't just house ghosts, it created monsters. Now picture this. You're walking across the old grounds at night. The wind is still, the sky is clear. You glance to the side and there it is, a towering figure, darker than the night. No face, no features, just watching you. What do? Do you run, or do you stand frozen, waiting for it to move first? Drop your answer below, because I'm curious how brave you really are. There's one last story I'll share here, one that chills me every time I think about it. It came from a former security guard who worked near the property after demolition. He said that late one night, while patrolling, he saw a single light glowing in the middle of the field. Confused because the hospital was gone, he walked closer. The glow grew stronger until he realized it wasn't a lamp at all. It was a window, a glowing hospital window suspended in midair. Through it, he swore he saw children lying in beds, nurses walking the halls, and the sound of beeping machines. It was as if, just for a moment, the Sunland Hospital still existed, replaying itself like a memory etched into the earth. And then, it vanished. He quit the job not long after. That story makes you wonder, doesn't it? What if places like Sunland never really die? What if they just bleed through, slipping into our world when the conditions are right? And here's where I want to challenge you. If you were standing there, in the middle of that field, and saw the hospital glowing in front of you like a ghost itself, would you step inside? Would curiosity win over fear? Or would you turn your back and run? The gates of Sunland are gone. The buildings themselves have been torn down, leveled to the ground, and paved over. But if you've made it with us through this entire journey, you know the truth already. Bricks and steel don't contain a haunting. And sometimes, when enough pain and darkness settle into a place, nothing, not even demolition, can erase what lingers there. Tonight, we walk together into the final descent. And if you thought you had already heard the worst of Sunland, what comes next may be the part that refuses to leave your mind. Imagine for a moment that you're standing in the field where the hospital once loomed. It's late, after midnight, the kind of hour when the air itself feels heavier. There are no walls, no lights, no corridors anymore. But still, something whispers. And instead of a single sound, it's dozens. Voices overlapping, crying, whispering, screaming, calling out for help. Some sound young, some sound old, some sound animalistic, broken, beyond human. Paranormal investigators who came in Sunland's final years, and even after its demolition, described it as the feeling of being outnumbered, not by one ghost, not by a dozen, but by all of them at once. One explorer wrote in their journal, It felt like standing in a crowded room where everyone was yelling at once, but when I looked around, I was completely alone. Others swore they saw shadows rushing at them from every direction, but when they shined their flashlight, the darkness itself seemed to retreat, only to come back stronger when the light dimmed. But the most disturbing part? Some say the voices are not angry, not violent, at least not always. Many are pleading, begging, especially the children. Sunland was, after all, once filled with young patients, many abandoned by families, many mistreated or neglected. Locals whisper that if you stand long enough in the field, you'll hear the faint sound of a child's laugh. Or worse, a lullaby, sung not to comfort, but to chill you to your core. A mother once visited the grounds years after demolition. She had no idea what had stood there before, only that her little boy had insisted on stopping the car as they passed by. He said he wanted to see the kids. She asked what kids he meant. He pointed at the grass and said, "The ones who keep waving." Think about that for a moment. A child, unaware of the hospital's history, saw children who weren't there. And if the spirits of children remain, if their laughter still cuts through the silence of the Florida night, then the question becomes, are they trapped here? Or are they trying to warn us? Some paranormal researchers believe Sunland is not simply a collection of separate hauntings. They believe it is one vast, collective force, that every scream, every cry, every ounce of fear and pain was absorbed into the ground until it fused into something larger. A dark entity, not a ghost, not a soul, but a thing. A parasite born from suffering. And that parasite doesn't just stay quiet. It uses voices, sometimes children, sometimes nurses, sometimes doctors, to lure the living in. One man, who snuck onto the property shortly before demolition, said he heard a woman call his name, not once but 3 times. When he turned the corner, he saw a woman in a white uniform staring at him from the end of the hall. But when he blinked, she was gone. Later that night, while reviewing his video camera, he found something more terrifying. His own voice calling back to her, even though he swears he never spoke. That is the kind of entity people believe Sunland left behind. Not something that waits for you to notice it, but something that steps inside you, something that tries to become you. And yet, even without the building, the land itself doesn't rest. Locals who live nearby say that strange things still happen in the area where Sunland once stood. Some report hearing screams in the distance, especially on windless nights. Others claim their pets refuse to go near the grass. Drivers have said they've seen glowing windows, phantom rectangles of light in midair, hovering where the old hospital's upper floors once stood, as if the building itself is still there, in another layer of reality. Some say the most disturbing encounters happen in dreams. People who grew up in Tallahassee describe nightmares of long, endless hallways filled with hospital beds, even if they never stepped foot on the property. Others wake up gasping, swearing they felt someone's hands around their throat, only to realize they had been dreaming of a hospital patient clawing for help. So I want to ask you something directly, because this is where your courage matters. Would you step foot on those grounds tonight? Would you walk across the field where hundreds of patients lived and died? Could you stand there in silence, knowing the voices might not just whisper in your ear, they might answer you if you spoke back? Tell me in the comments, would you go? And if you did, what would you bring for protection? A crucifix, a flashlight, or maybe nothing at all? And while you're down there, I want you to tell me something else too. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it right now? Because if you're watching late at night, in the dark, I promise you, you're not alone in that room. If you've made it this far into Sunland's story, then you're already one of us. So before we take our last step here, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Not just for more stories, but because every time you come back, you're rejoining a family of people who share the same thrill of exploring the places the world wants to forget. And trust me, the next haunted hospital we're going to visit will make Sunland feel like a warm-up. But before we leave, I want you to sit with this thought. Sunland is gone. Its walls are rubble. Its hallways, dust. And yet, people still see its windows glowing. Still hear its voices. Still feel its shadows pressing against their skin. That means Sunland never died. It simply changed shape. And if ghosts are echoes of the past, maybe Sunland has learned to whisper across more than space. Maybe it has learned to whisper across time. Maybe it has already reached into your dreams. Maybe, by hearing this story, you've already opened the door. If you wake up tonight and hear children laughing in the dark, or footsteps in the hall where no one should be, don't say I didn't warn you, because Sunland doesn't let go. And as one final warning, remember this. People who have listened to this story all the way through have reported hearing voices afterwards. A shadow in the corner of their eye, a name whispered in their ear. If that happens to you tonight, don't panic. Just know that the gates of Sunland have opened again, and this time, they may have followed you home.